If you want to read better and think more clearly and understand the ideas shaping our world, then this might be for you. You should join the Dr. John Patrick Book Club. It's a private online community where we read great books together and learn how to think, not just what to think. Inside, you're going to have access to Dr. John Patrick as we work through books and ask questions. If you've ever felt like there are books you should be reading or ideas that you want to understand better, but you didn't want to do it alone, this is a good place to start. You can find the link in the show notes or the description below to join.
Hello, this is John Patrick. Those of you who haven't been here before, and apparently occasionally there are some, I'm a retired professor, taught in biochemistry and pediatrics for 20 or so years, having had a wonderful, interesting life before doing medicine and getting into an interesting sideline in research that led me to living in Jamaica for 7 years, paid for by the wonderful organization called the Wellcome Trust, and being part of a team which, for the first time, had 100% success in resuscitating severely malnourished children, 10-pound 2-year-olds. Not just the odd one, but going through 100 in a row and not losing a single one. And when that unit had been started by John Waterlow after the Second World War, the death rates, depending on where you went to look, were over 50% for the children. We didn't take them in unless they were 10-pound 2-year-olds or worse. So I was there for the last 7 years. I went for 2, stayed for 7 because the trust said they'd look after my career, which they did. That's who I am at that level. But then I retired a couple of years early from the university because I get into arguments, and I got into arguments with students, and I started writing about them because that led to arguments with the Faculty of Education, whose intellectual standing is not very high in my view. I don't think you can teach people to teach. I think it's a gift. Great writers. Wendell Berry's Miss Minnie is my favorite example. One-room schoolroom teacher who went to college to get teacher training, but she never used what she learnt there because she had the essence of a great teacher, which is not something you can measure or that you can predictably inculcate. It's 2 loves: the love of learning, which comes from the love of books, and the love of people. So she taught by merely introducing the children to the books they should know, of which the most important one in those days was still acknowledged to be the Bible. Now we have politicians who are constantly dealing with ever-increasing amounts of corruption, and they still don't make the connection. And so that's what I want to talk about today. I don't know where this talk will get to. I have about 8 points in front of me to keep me somewhat in order, and I have to do that more than I used to because my poor old mind is not doing so well with recent events. Short-term memory is, those of you of my age know that you can set off to go to another room to do something and then forget why you went by the time you got there. But you can still quote poetry from 300 years ago that you learnt as a child. I was interested this week, actually, to come across a brief video which was of a woman who was married to a well-known popular singer, not well-known to me, but what interested me is what she had to say. He got to the point where he didn't recognize her. And then she realized he could still sing. So she began their mornings by starting a song, and he had his whole vocabulary of songs which were imprinted in the past were still there. He gave his last concert, apparently, when he no longer recognized his wife, but he could sing all the songs. we are fearfully and wonderfully made, aren't we? The mind is another country, and watching the way it works is astonishing. Some of it we begin to understand, but not much. I don't think we've got a long, long way to go in understanding this. But this just came to mind. I don't know why. Well, I do. I had a patient who came in, and her complaint, I was doing neurology in Oxford. Her complaint was very interesting. She said, I've always loved crossword puzzles. I used to be able to do the Times crossword puzzle, which is the top one. That's it. That's the puzzle beyond puzzles, so to speak. There's even a lovely Morse detective story that hinges on that phenomenon. Anyway, she said, but then I just couldn't do the Times anymore, so I moved to the Guardian, and then the Telegraph. I ended up just about able to do the Mirror, which is a very low-level paper, shall we say, the sort of crossword that a crossword aficionado wouldn't even look at. And she said, I've no idea what's wrong. Well, as it turned out, she had a tumour, fortunately benign, near to the parietal lobe. The tumour was removed, and then I watched as she reversed the process. She went from the Mirror to the Express, to the Telegraph, to the Guardian, and back to the Times. Astonishing. My sister-in-law had what she had a vascular episode and was taken to hospital, and they made the diagnosis that she'd had a stroke, but then they found she had no physical weakness in any of her limbs. They had a little bit of a problem. Actually, her daughter called us, and I talked to her. I said, well, go back to her and draw a circle on a piece of paper and ask her to put the numbers of the clock, 1 to 12, round the circle in the right place. As she came back, she said she put them all on one side. Said, well, they're right, she had a stroke, but it was a little bit further forward or further back. I'm getting old. It's in the parietal lobe rather than the motor cortex. And slowly she recovered. But you can look, the more you study the mind and the way things work, the more in awe of the whole process you become. The world is truly miraculous in so many ways. And we've had a long story since we started moving down from science to scientism. And now I think we're coming back. In my mind, there's no question that some of the smartest people in the world are saying, we need faith. We need beliefs. And the question will become, which God are you worshipping? Because not all gods lead to the same sort of life. I mean, that's the question for the Muslims in the Western world who are currently trying to enforce Islamic ways of living on the Western world. The question is easy. I say, look, you're told in the Quran you should not live with the infidels if you don't have to, and you don't have to. So why don't you go and live in a Muslim country? You are supposed, as Douglas Murray pointed out, he does it beautifully, he said, you want us to believe that Mohammed was the last and greatest of the prophets, and there is no more prophet in line. The next thing will be the second coming, which they believe in too, when Jesus will come back to judge. But if you are supposedly the most close to God culture, if you like, why is there nowhere in the Muslim world that you want to live more than here? They have no answer to that question. They are economic migrants now because they don't think about it. In their culture, there's no separation between church and state. They haven't gone through that process. They don't even know their own history. And sadly, we as Christians don't do a great deal about dealing with that. Raymond Ibrahim would be a good person for you to start. You can watch him first because you're all of you probably somewhat addicted to screens. And it does have the advantage of getting to important points quite quickly. And you can find him all over the place now. He's becoming quite popular, but he does a very good review of Western history. And he's a little bit in advance of Tom Holland, who's going down the same track, both from a historian's point of view. And they move, as is inevitable if they're intellectually honest, towards the recognition that there is a God and that the probable true story is, in fact, the Judeo-Christian one. Now, even the Western world now, it's hilarious, really. One can't help smiling. I mean, they've spent the liberal elite who rule us, who want anything but moral accountability, are being forced to recognize that it might matter. It really is quite hilarious. They get up in arms about some forms of corruption and exploitation, as long as it doesn't touch them. But they're in trouble. I mean, we're all sinners, aren't we? I mean, I don't think you'd be listening to me if you found that outrageous. If you are listening and you do find it outrageous, just think for a moment. We are all sinners. You couldn't walk around with a bubble over your head showing the world around you what you're actually thinking, could you? Our thoughts are awful. We need every day. I've been at it for a long while. I still need to spend time praying and asking for help to deal with my mind, which can go off in directions which are far from healthy, with the greatest of ease. Thank God I wasn't born in a time when access to the internet was available. I had a bicycle and lots of books. That was much better. I don't think I would have survived if I was a student today. I would have been a gamer or something like that and waste my life. Whereas, I mean, it's Easter week. We had 20 of our family, one or two others, nearly 30 actually, in our home on the Monday after Easter, when we had one of our grandchildren and his wife and his adorable son staying with us over the Easter weekend. It's lovely to be able I don't need to do anything other than sit in the room and watch the interactions. They're delightful, especially little children. They do and say such wonderful things. But I mean, on that Easter Monday, I had a wonderful conversation with a whole bunch of my teen, early 20s grandsons. It was all grandsons, amazingly. But we talked about the kinds of things I talk about on this podcast because they apparently listen to it. And so I get feedback as to what they want me to do next. There's one big one hanging there, which I haven't yet picked up, because one of them wants me to read to the first version of the Sermon on the Mount that takes slightly over an hour then, and I will have great difficulty in doing it within an hour now because it has grown so much. And I'm not sure whether it's suitable to a podcast. We'll see. It's there at the back of my mind. But they were wide open. I started by talking to them about the fact that I was going to do some talks in the University of Edmonton to mainly medical students and doctors, and also a philosophy class in Concordia. And I was thinking of starting with some poetry, and I read it, the poem that's been on my mind over the last little while from Malcolm Guite's collection on. He's written a whole series of poems on the words of Jesus, and particularly I love the one that he's done on "I am the way, the truth, and the life." And its opening line is beautiful for people who are modern. He says, Wherever someone knows that they are lost and turns to find their way back and cries for help to find their way back home. And he points out that that's where they begin to realize there is a way. Deep down, they know it before they know the name of that way, which is actually a person. And it's an absolutely beautiful poem. So if you love poetry, get Malcolm Guite. Let's see if I've actually got it written down. Yeah, here we go. Wherever someone knows that they are lost and cries for help to find the way back home and turns toward their father's house at last, you are their way before they know your name. That's the opening half. Enough to pull you in. I don't want to do it all so that you want to go and find it yourself. It'll bug you. It ends by this. You are the life within the life they love. You come to us before we ask or pray, till you become our life, our truth, our way. Poetry says in a few words what ordinary mortals take a book to deal with. So that discussion that arose from that is, how many of the people in your class would actually admit that they're searching, they're lost in some sense? And the answer is a lot. Just yesterday, I was talking to a young man who came to give us a second opinion on our internal heating problem. But we talked for about half an hour about this, and he went away with a copy of Peter Crave's The Best Things in Life and said he'll come back and see me. Because he's 39, he's not married, he's looking for the way, and hopefully he will find it. So, the other fascinating discussion, well, there's several, but the other one that stands out was we had a discussion at the men's group I go to every Saturday, and we got onto multiculturalism, which was surprising. And it was a mechanic who said it's rubbish, straight out. It can't be true. And he couldn't articulate his argument that well, but he'd got firmly in his mind that we need to think about purpose a lot more than we do. Now, that's putting purpose up there at front. It's a Greek idea. I mean, it's the four categories of analysis for the Greeks, post-Aristotelian, required you, in order to give an account of something, to think about its material cause, what's it made of, what's it doing, its formal cause, how it was put together, where the ideas in it came from, the efficient cause, who had the skills to do it, and then the final one, why is it being done? That purpose, that's teleology. Science doesn't believe in teleology. Of course, it's rubbish. It's there all the while, but they're just in denial. Why are they doing science in the first place? They want to know, but they've tried to divorce it from any complete account. So science and multiculturalism are an interesting discussion, because experimental science doesn't pop up everywhere. It only popped up effectively and got transformed in Western Europe, nowhere else. The idea of doing an experiment is irrational and unthinkable if you look at the surface of nature with all its apparent chaos and contradictions. It's only after 1,500 years of Christian culture did it emerge, a bit less than 1,500. I follow David Lindbergh, who taught me this, that 1277 is a reasonable date to look at. When experiments were beginning, deductive logic was being used, it was powerful, and the church was afraid. So the Bishop of Paris banned it while it was studied. And, of course, That meant since the universities had started in the 12th century, and they were each local and they were under the control of the local bishop. So in Paris, they were not allowed to use this new Aristotelian logic, deductive. They defaulted to inductive, which everybody does, inductive reasoning. You can look at something that you can study with reasonable, simple tools, and they started doing experiments. The experiment is unthinkable to people who don't have an idea that under the surface chaos of life there's order. So experiments have deep commitments, which they use, not commitments, deep foundations in Judeo-Christian theology, which they usually refuse to acknowledge. I mean, there are plenty of people who would, if they would read them, they would come to the conclusion, no, we ought to acknowledge it. But they're so narrowly educated. I mean, when you move into science, it's consuming. You have to be very disciplined if you're going to have a space in your life for anything other than science. It can easily consume a lot. And those of you who meet people who are really good at it and also have a big ego, they're not going to have any time for God for a long while till things fall apart. Usually at my age, when I look around on my colleagues I've known along the way, and they're now in their 80s, and I was playing the game with myself. Now, what did he do that I still remember scientifically? And does anyone else remember it? It's a very salutary exercise because most of us don't have very much showing at the end of our lives for all that effort. We got grants, we got money, we had a career, but did we do any good? Did we make the world a better place? No. But where did these ideas that we should make it a better place come from? Well, they're built in deeply. Now, usually you do it at a very small level. Chesterton said the greatest religion in the world before Christianity, Judeo-Christian thought came in, was, of course, paganism. And its explanatory mode was evil spirits. And it's still dominant in Africa and in parts of Asia. In the West now, we're worse than that. We don't have a belief in anything. We're nihilists or on the way to nihilism, which is not going to take us anywhere good. But paganism sort of holds you at a stop because it does explain the world. I mean, everybody's life has to face problems, doesn't it? Death, suffering, etc. How do you explain them? We're all uncomfortable with not having explanations. People go to the doctor because they know they're not well. And they will even say thank you when you say, well, I know what's wrong with you. And they'll immediately express, oh, good. And I say, but the news is not good. But now they know what they have to do. So they even say thank you when you tell them that they're going to die and there is no treatment and they have less than a year to go. That happened in Jamaica quite often for local reasons. And I was astonished. Nobody ever had a hissy fit, so to speak. The usual thing was, oh, now I've got to straighten things out. That's right. We need to straighten things out at the end of our lives. We all resist. I'm resisting in various ways. We all need help to get over that hump. But as Robert Spitzer taught me, the last 6 weeks of your life are usually, if you take the opportunity, the point at which more reconciliation happens than at any other time in your life. You want to settle those things. I mean, people fall out, don't they? You can remember people with whom you were quite close and friendly and you've lost contact. At our age, you start reaching out a little bit. It's common. People reach out to me. I'm not as good at reaching out to them. Should do more, but in a way, that's what this podcast does. rebuilding relationships that fell apart for no good reason is not easy. A lot of us retreat into isolation. That's a bad move. That's why the church is so good for us, but you can't tell people that. They have to sort of discover it for themselves. The men's group that started me on this multicultural trip, the guy said, it's the best part of my week. I really look forward to Saturday morning. Not many of them out of a church of 100 or so. We have about a dozen regular members. But they're learning about one another and what our quirks are, the things that we can enjoy about one another. I mean, one of them said last week, I love you guys, even John. Not easy to love, John. Yep. So back to this question. What do we need at the end of life? The mechanic, the car mechanic in our group said, well, we need more purpose. We've got to teach the kids purpose. And that, of course, was the fourth part of the Aristotelian view of how the world should be understood. Everything has purpose, and we need to find it. Teleology. If you want to remember those 4 points to talk to other people, just think of a statue. Again, I got this from David Lindbergh. It's a lovely way to do it. A statue has a material cause. Let's think of Michelangelo at his best. A lump of marble. But it needs the mind of Michelangelo to see what's in that marble. He would say, I release what I see. That's the formal cause, if you like, the intellectual cause. But then you have to be very skilled with your chisel and your hammer and everything else, which he was. I mean, you can't go and look at something like his statue of David in the Uffizi Gallery and not be awestruck. But he was a brilliant artist. But why did he do it? He did it to express his realization that the created world was beautiful. And he was a God-fearing man. You couldn't paint the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel if you didn't have that driving you forward in some way. Like all of us, he was a fallen man too. That's the beauty of Christianity. It's honest about our problem. Our problem is not knowing what is good and what we should do. It's doing it. That's where we need the help. And that's what the means of grace do. Now, all cultures don't function in the same way. And so a very reasonable approach to people from other cultures is to ask them, the religion that you have that is central to your life, where do I see it at work in the world? What does it produce in the way of a society? And are you pleased with those results? Now, we don't have to be ashamed of what Judeo-Christian thought did. We all went the same way. I mean, even the Bible's, I think it's in the Bible. I have to look. The time of year when kings go out to fight. I don't understand why God made us the way he did. And one day there will be seminars on the same in heaven, I hope. There are lots of questions I want to hear in detail. But warfare happened at various stages in human life, and it's never stopped. So we need to understand where that comes from now. From a Christian point of view, we know it's the fall that did it, the fact that we are selfish in so many ways. And when it's writ large, without the constraints of the fear of the Lord, trouble ensues. I mean, it's not an accident that one of the greatest gifts in the English-speaking world is common law. It came from Alfred and his sons, the first genuinely Christian king, who actually translated parts of the Bible into the vernacular for his people. The invention of judgment by your peers, 12 good men and true to begin with when we were sexist, Now that bit is improved. I think we've gone too far now because, I don't have to make this case myself. Read Helen Andrews if you on feminism. If you doubt that there are appropriate relationships between men and women, and when they get out of sync, it's not good. I mean, the women have, in one sense, the harder job. My wife has done her part well, particularly in the sense of not letting me shirk my duty. They know what needs to be done, and they know which things father should do. And one of them is related to the question of the law and justice. How many of you have not heard from your mother, when your father gets home, it's not going to be good news when I tell him what you've done today? We have that role. The Jews take it very seriously, but they didn't teach it to the rest of us. If only we could write Deuteronomy 6 on the hearts of everybody in the world and get them to at least attempt what is set out for them, we would make a huge difference. I mean, Denzel Washington nails it. I've heard him several times now when silly, hyper-liberal interviewers think that he's going to be on their side. And he says, look, the worst thing that's happened to the black community in America, largely because of Johnson's and the Democrats' cynical approach to making the black community dependent on the government, what has happened is that men have got sidelined. Johnson paid a pension to a woman who had a baby, but her husband wasn't living with her. If she had a baby and her husband was living with her, she got no help. You can see where that leads, and it's led there. And Denzel Washington said, the biggest problem for us is absentee fathers. And he doesn't beat about the bush. He said, a boy needs a father who can talk to him of what it means to be a man and how it works. Suck it up, kid. You run to your mom when you've got a scratched knee and she comforts you, and your dad looks and said, you're going to survive, get on with it. Different roles. And where the man does his duty, which is to see that his children learn serious history. Biblical history is the way you do it with the Jews, but you do in other areas, and see how easily we go astray. And so the serious Jewish father wants to make sure that his son knows all the history of the Jews. Now, they're the only culture on earth that has an honest, in-your-face view of their own history. They don't face it very well. I mean, even the Jews in Israel today are not very believing. They don't practice their faith very well or very much. But it's there for a reminder, and they know enough to be serious about the question of the fall and what you can truly believe about human nature. So the child who hears those stories, you go to the prophets and the kings and the history, and the kings in particular, they're summarized easily. He did evil in the sight of the Lord, or every now and again, about 1 in 10, he did what is right in the sight of the Lord. And their lives then show what happens. Sometimes somewhat delayed, but they do learn that God always says, vengeance is mine, I will repay at the time that I choose to be most appropriate. Sometimes it's a long while, but it happens. Moral consequence is real. Now, we live in a world that wants to believe that moral consequence isn't real. And we've been going down that road for a long while, and very unhappily on the whole. It hasn't done us a lot of good. A few examples. The pill. I remember listening to a Reith lecture about the pill by its discoverer, inventor, mixture of the two, and he was giving the Reith lecture and crowing about the fact that he had separated the joy of sex from the risk of babies, and the world was going to be a much better place. Of course, it's been a disaster. The first thing that started to happen, of course, was sexually transmitted disease started going through the roof, and it's not getting better. I mean, there's now new outbreaks of syphilis in, where did I see it? Michigan. Yeah, we had that under control at one point. But when uh, when the AIDS epidemic came along, all that the liberal elite had to offer was condoms. Well, condoms have a finite failure rate, and it's not that small. So anybody who can multiply two figures together can multiply the figures for number of sexual contacts and the failure rate of the condom, and if you use it, and it doesn't produce a good figure. When you go and look at the very first papers before we knew what it was all about. I mean, it was initially called gay bowel disease, but the first paper that I read was in the New England Journal many years ago, and I couldn't believe the x-axis, which was number of contacts per year. It went over 1,000. That was the age of the homosexual bathhouse, where you just circulated and randomly sodomized one another. The result we all know. And what they wanted was sympathy, which they got, but they also needed reality, which they don't want. They do not put into their ideas for the future of health that those people who take part in knowingly dangerous activities ought to pay insurance for any untoward effect. Now, we do that in some areas. I mean, my passion as a young man was rock climbing and mountaineering. And we knew that if we got into trouble, somebody would come and rescue us. But that costs money. Nowadays, in many places now, you have to pay a small insurance fee when you go climbing in certain places. And that covers the cost. And who would argue against that? That's reasonable. If you do things that are dangerous and are going the damage is going to be paid for out of the public purse, then it shouldn't be paid for out of the public purse. It should be paid for out of your purse or your group's purse. Now, I mean, the only safe advice when the AIDS epidemic came along was chastity before marriage and faithfulness afterwards. One man, one wife. You can't get AIDS then. That was unacceptable, of course. That's the world we live in. It's in denial of consequence, and our job is to constantly point it out. Now, how do you do that? What are you going to teach your children? And I've already gone on too long, but I want to finish with this, because one of the things you need to do is to see that your children are somewhat equipped to deal with the world. And Jesus loves you is true, but in many parts of particularly the academic world, that's not a smart opening move, because it's too easy for them to trivialize what you've said. It's much better to go back to the more ancient rules, the Greek ones. How are you answering the major questions of life? How do you answer them? And they said, what do you mean? Well, I said, from the beginning of writing, we've always known that certain things really trouble us as human beings, and we need answers. And they are these. Where did I come from? Why am I here? Where am I going? How can I make sense of death and suffering? And how can I have the temerity to believe that justice might be possible? What can I know for certain? So then I know what I ought to believe, and then I know what I ought to do. Those 9 questions everybody has to face. Usually they haven't got very far. And multiculturalism falls on those questions. Can it answer those questions? You can't just take out, I must have a purpose in my life. It's bigger than that. It's more complex than that. There are bigger narratives than that. Yes, you must have a purpose in your life, and it must be the right one, but that doesn't solve all the problems immediately, because the purpose for your life is somewhat incomprehensible to you. When you get to my age, you can look back and say, oh, that's why that happened. How amazing. 2 missionaries prayed for me for 30 years. From the day they heard I was conceived, they prayed every day that I would become a Christian, I'd become a doctor, and I'd go to the Belgian Congo. Nobody told me about that until I called my dad when I was in my, I guess, mid-40s and said, Dad, my mother was dead. Sally and I and the kids are going to Africa for a year next year to what was the Belgian Congo to help a mission group with malnourished children. He was silent for a moment and he said, John, I waited 45 years to hear you say that. That's the narrative that's rich enough to take you through. And of course, one of the things about being a doctor is you see people at the end of their lives. And you can see why John Wesley would say when people said, you're too emotional, he would say, come and watch how people die. Come and watch how people die. How are you going to die? Are people going to be around your bed, amazed that you are at peace, and watching you leave this world and go to the next, sometimes with visible pleasure at what is coming, especially in children? They're occasionally given a sight of what's next as a child. Diane Comp describes the first child she sat with dying of, I think it was leukemia, with mum and dad and the hospital chaplain and her. And she was fading away in a terminal coma when suddenly she woke up briefly and she said, Mummy, can you see the angels? Can you hear their singing? It's beautiful. And she was gone. What would you do? Go away and think about it. God bless you.